Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video I want to share with you guys my early discoveries for PoE 2 as well as my first impressions. Now, let's keep it short and sweet and start with that. So, first impressions, what do I think? Well, it's damn hard and I'm having a lot of fun. That's pretty much all I really think. I haven't really gotten too much into it in terms of really know. I'm basically in Endgame now, level 75, Blood Mage. Pretty damn hard to get through that story, especially on the Blood Mage, but once I got to maps, stuff started to get a whole lot easier, whole lot more options, having a whole lot more fun, and then when the trade site came up, oh man, it got even better. I can start making a better currency, buying my upgrades, and now I'm really getting into it. But yeah, definitely a bit of a hard one on the start, especially Acts 1, 2, and 3 the first time. Once you get the skill gems, which are, pretty strong, you get into Acts 4, 5, and 6, cruel version of them, basically, it gets a lot easier. So definitely enjoyed the second half of the campaign a lot more than the first, and I'm enjoying maps even more than that. So I guess that's something to look forward to if you're a player who might be a little bit like me. It definitely gets a lot more like PoE 1 the further you get into Endgame. Alright, so with that covered, the first impressions are done. Let's get into the discoveries. Right, so first it's going to be some campaign tips, but don't worry, if you guys are in Endgame already, I will have some Endgame stuff for you, but I want to cover the campaign stuff first, because a lot of these, if someone handed these to me at the very start, I would have had such an easier time getting through things, because man, some of these things aren't exactly obvious, or they go against what we thought would be the case in PoE 2. So the very first tip is going to be build with a focus on damage. You do need defense, but you need more damage than you need defense, and the reason for that is that every boss fight is a war of attrition, and that war of attrition is fought over your flasks. Most characters don't really have a reliable form of recovery for mana or life early on, and it's kind of niche who gets it and who doesn't. I know for me, myself, I had neither of them, it was only my flasks, and as soon as they ran out, so did I. And the only way to really combat that is, first of all, by upgrading your flasks, which I definitely recommend you do, or B, by killing the boss faster so they run out, a little bit less fast. So that's pretty much all there is to it. Kill the boss or run out of flasks. Win or lose. That's really all there is. So definitely invest in damage so that you're on the good side of that equation and you kill the boss before you run out of flasks. That's where it's at. My next tip is don't ascend straight away. In Act 2, you'll get access to your first Ascension, which is Trial of the Secumes. In Act 3, you'll get access to the Trial of Chaos, which is your second Ascension. You don't have to do them straight away. They're not mandatory for the campaign. You can progress past them and then come back. All of these are tuned much higher than the point that you get access to them in the campaign, and because of that, I definitely recommend putting them off, at least, for a few levels or even an entire act, which is what I did, to make sure that you're not stuck there banging your head against a wall. By putting them off, you can basically go back and one-shot them with a much higher level and much higher gear, and you're basically just going to streamline the process of it, and you'll have a much more fun time, in my opinion. Especially with the Trial of Chaos. So you can probably squeak by with the Trial of the Secumes going straight in, straight away, especially if you want to get that first Ascendancy point. But the Trial of Chaos is very hard. It's tuned way up, and it feels like the damage in there is just almost unfair. And the mods that you're given can be pretty brutal when you don't have a whole lot of solutions to the problems that they pose. So that one specifically, the Trial of the Chaos, I would definitely put it off. And I actually ended up putting it off until Act 5, and you get it in Act 3. So yeah, definitely, pay a bit of care around that, and you'll probably have a much easier time. The next tip is make sure you have all of your passive bonuses from all of the monsters in the campaign. All the unique mobs, all the quests, make sure you get them all. Now, there's a lot of quests which don't really give much of anything. They give like an item reward or a skill gem or something like that. Those are no good. Fortunately, it's very easy to tell them apart. Any quest or boss with a plus icon here that you can see this little cross, you need to do that one. That's going to give you a permanent power boost. Those are the only ones you want to do. Ignore all the rest unless you want some specific item from them, and make sure you check underground, because you can see here, this is a plus right here. He was underground. So I highly recommend checking right now or after this video or whatever. Check all 6 acts if you've done them all, and make sure you have all the points. And when you're going through the story, I recommend picking them up as you go, because they're big power boosts in the moment. Whether there's 2 skill points, boom, you can get some more defense, more attributes, whatever. They really will help you along. So make sure you get on that, especially if you're already in endgame and are missing a few. Now, on that note, there is one quest which is not really easily marked on the map, and it does give a passive bonus, and that is in the Valley of the Titans. So it's here on the map. Once you get up to it, you can travel to it, and right at the waypoint, there is an altar, and that altar can have 2 halves of an amulet socketed into it. Now, those halves of an amulet drop throughout Act 2. You won't necessarily get them in the Valley of the Titans. It can be later on in Act 2 from random monsters, but once you do get them, come back to this waypoint and physically drag them onto each part of the amulet slot here. And once you have both on there, you'll get the choice between 2 buffs which you can have active. And don't worry, you can swap between them as you see fit here, and you can choose whichever one you want. My next tip is in Cruel. The very second you get there, you gain access to the currency exchange. It's going to be on one of the NPCs, and you can use this to get a ton of quick and convenient upgrades. The very best one I've found, and wish I knew to go and check early, is Artificer's Orb. So an Artificer Orb allows you to add a socket to your gear, and if you have something like an Exalt, an easily tradable currency, you can get a lot of these very, very quickly. It's usually about 1 to 3, so 1 Exalt which you find becomes 3 Artificer Orbs, which becomes 3 sockets on your gear to socket runes into. Now you can go fix your res, you can get life, or on an attack based build you can even get some damage. Now, this is a really, really good power spike to get you a little bit more smoothly through Cruel. Highly recommend going for it and getting that stuff done. Now you can go for other stuff as well. You can pick up Regal Orbs, you can pick up other stuff, but mainly it's the Artifice Orbs. It's the big power spike. Now on the other side of the spectrum, you can actually buy uniques with your exalts as well if you want, and drop some. A good example of that would be Life Sprig. For this one specifically, try and get +3 level of spell gems, but overall a lot of classes have great leveling uniques, and dropping just 1 exalted orb can get you them, which can be a huge power spike in the campaign, which the campaign's not necessarily balanced around, which can give you a big leg up and make your life a lot easier. So definitely recommend that. I'd be spending some of my exalts on leveling uniques if I had access to trade when I was doing it, that is for sure. So that's definitely an option as well. Now also on trade is jewels, and you're going to get a ton of jewel sockets no matter which class you are, so I'd highly recommend checking out some jewels, because leaving them empty is just leaving power on the table. So overall, you get a ton of them. Like, I think I had 5 or 6 of them empty, like the whole campaign. And that was a ton of power I was just lost. Just one mod on all of those jewels could have been 50% increased damage, which would have been a huge difference to my clearing potential. And they're not too expensive. You can pick up some of them for, Chaos Orbs and Alchemy Orbs. The really good ones will cost Exalts, but if you do get a few Exalts here and there, it can be a pretty damn good purchase to pick up a jewel or 2 as well to suck it in, and it might give you a little bit of an edge, and it'll give you what we needed earlier, which is damage. The next thing I'd recommend doing is making sure you pick up items. I know it sounds weird, but a lot of people, especially PoE 1 players, they seem to skip over items, myself included. And when I caught myself doing it, I realized that's why I had no gear. That's why I had no upgrades. Because I just wasn't looting anything. And what I mean by that is, yes, you have to loot the white and the magic items as well, not just the rares. Let me take you through it. So of course, you loot all the rares, and if they're upgrades, great. But the magic items can be upgrades as well. I'd loot up pretty much all of the base types which you can use. So if you're an evasion character, loot up all the evasion armor pieces, and of course, loot weapons which are magic as well, and quivers. Pick them up, identify them. If they've got 1 good mod on them, use an augmentation orb on it. If it's 2 good mods, okay, regal time. And then if that's really good, then you can throw some exalted orbs at it. But I didn't just stop there. I was pretty damn hungry for gear, at least myself. There was no trade available. So I actually picked up white items as well, and I was transmute orging them, looking for some extra regal juice to try and get a few upgrades. And it actually served me pretty damn well, and I got a lot of my best items actually just from white bases, which I ended up crafting from 0. Using this tactic, you can also use a few of the essences you find along the way, because there will be some of those in the story as well. But that's a pretty good way to get some gear in addition to the other channels we've already discussed. Alright, so the next tip will depend a little bit on you as a player. So if you get stuck, I would definitely recommend contemplating going and looking at what the broken combos are for your class. It seems pretty much every class has them, and going from not using them to using them can result in ending up being like 4 or 5, maybe even more times damage, especially on bosses. A good example of this for me was I was stuck on Viper, one of the bosses in Act 3. I could not kill her, I just didn't have the damage, I ran out of flasks, and it was just not working. And then I heard that there was a really OP combo of combining Frost Wall with Fireball and Unleash, and if you shot the fireballs at just the right angle with the Frost Wall all set up, it was just broken, and it would just chunk bosses. And with that, I went from doing 10 or 20 attempts on her with my current setup to one-shotting her the very next attempt with that combo. So if you're stuck and you're okay looking for help, I would definitely look for your combos which are really broken, whether that's online or from other players. It can really help, and it'll get you over the issue or the roadblock that you're stuck at. Next up is the topic of defense, and this is more of just an info bite than a tip, but we had a bunch of players in Discord. We had a bunch of people playing the Mage archetype, Sorcerer/Witch, a bunch of players playing the Evasion archetype, which is Monk and Ranger, and a bunch of people playing Warrior. And we were all going through the campaign, chatting, not playing together, but talking to each other while we played, and it was interesting to see which characters did very well and had the easiest time and which ones didn't. And I can tell you, out of all of the characters, it was clear that the defensive type was very important, and the one that had the easiest time was definitely the Evasion archetype, the Monk and the Ranger. And that's because in the story, the way that it seems to end up scaling, you end up with like 70 to 80% evasion just from floor rares and magic items. The evasion just scales very, very well in the campaign, and that's going to be a ton of mitigation. Now, the Warriors and the strength-based characters, they had a pretty good time with armor as well. Similar to Evasion, there seems to be some pretty good scaling with the armor in the campaign, so you can mitigate a lot of damage, but you will still need to build some resistances. And now, on the energy shield front, that's a bit rough. I don't know why. Maybe we just didn't build the energy shield characters correctly, but it definitely feels like mage or energy shield based characters have the rough end of the stick when it comes to the story. You don't get much mitigation in the form of armor and much, EHP in the form of evasion, so you're just stuck taking every single hit, which can leave you high and dry, especially on bosses, and getting swarmed if you don't play perfectly. So if you're looking for easy mode in the campaign, probably an evasion based character, if I was going to do it again, is probably the play. But, endgame, things change a little bit. While evasion is very strong in a campaign, and armor is very decent in a campaign, and energy shield might be the weakest, I think it changes a little bit in endgame. Evasion is definitely still very strong in endgame, but getting one random hit to one-shot you is much more punishing in endgame than it is in the story. Armor is very reliable. I'm personally building armor myself, and I expect energy shield in endgame to really take off and be one of the best defenses, because you can find ways to recover it finally, you can scale a lot higher, you have the items to really take it to the next level. So that's kind of how it ends up shifting there, and maybe this gives you a bit of info on what you might want to reroll to if you do end up rerolling, or if you're just starting a new character in general. My last tip in the campaign is going to be about mana. Mana is a big deal in the campaign, and sustaining it on bosses is a huge consideration. And it gets pretty tough when you start getting up there in the levels. And the reason for that is because mana costs scale seemingly exponentially with gem levels. So this is particularly a problem if you end up getting a lot of plus level of X gem on your gear. You can have a skill which is a much higher level than is intended for your current level, and the mana cost is obviously tied to that much higher level, which can mean you're consuming, sometimes a quarter or a third of your mana with a single cast, which makes it very hard to do bosses and even in, just general clearing. And the resulting gameplay from that is you having to go back to town, click the well, come back, click the town, click the well, ping pong, back and forth between town. And that can be a little bit annoying. And on bosses, it can straight up make it so that you can't do them at all. Now, the solution to this is simple. You just make sure that you don't have too many plus levels on your gear. If you're batting in the expected range of the gem level of your zone, you won't have too many issues. But if you supersede that by massive amounts, like +4 levels, that's when you start to have issues. So, of course, you don't want to lose the damage associated with that. So try and trade the plus level of gems from your gear for other forms of damage, which is a little bit more sustainable. And that's what I found. And that actually even extends into endgame, because at least for me, mana is still a problem, and taking off those plus level of gems for other forms of damage, which are roughly equivalent, was a huge lifesaver in terms of flasks, mana, and all sorts of stuff like that. Okay, so as promised, let's do a little bit of endgame talk here at the end. Alright, so very first thing, I want to talk a little bit about the Atlas. I haven't explored enough of this to really form a solid opinion yet, but I do have a few things which I have been doing and have discovered. So first thing you guys are going to want to know is that you no longer lose pathing on a node when you die. So let's say that I ran this map here, I died, it won't go red like they showed in the trailer, it will remain open, but there's a catch. You will lose all bonuses on that map. So for example, if I did this one with Delhi ritual and some lighthouse mods here. If I failed, all gone, and you'll lose your juice. So that is a bit of a downside. It's basically to counter out exploiting, because if you didn't do that, you'd be able to just reset it and get all your juice over and over and over again, which would be too strong. But it's a little bit less punishing in endgame. With that said, there is a pretty big thing to consider, and that is if you do die, you don't progress. You need to do a lot of maps in endgame to progress the story, and you don't want to be dying on them. And map sustain also isn't that easy. You have a lot of trouble getting the higher tier maps, at least I do right now, so you don't want to be losing your high tier maps constantly to deaths. So when you do get into endgame, I highly recommend switching your focus away from the damage a little bit, revert it, and go into the defensive portion instead now, because you're not really on a clock with the bosses. Most of the maps don't even have bosses in them. You can portal in and out 6 times if you want to kill a rare. It's not an issue. So switch the focus from damage to defense, and one of the defenses is very, very important, and that is Chaos Res. So there is a ton of Chaos damage in the maps, but specifically there is a rare modifier, which is a Chaos Explosion, which happens on death, and it is enormous. It's like the whole screen. If you're in a corridor, it's very hard to dodge, and it is almost certain death if you have 0 Chaos resistance. Now, this is another tip for you guys. There is a reward, a bandit-like reward from one of the quests in the story. Pick Chaos Resistance. I'm telling you, it's very, very hard to get. Capping it out is probably going to be an expectation in endgame, and I honestly can't get enough of it. I'm trying to get to 75 myself, and it is hard. Of course, cap the other resistances as well, and I personally found that armor is the favorable defense for me, at least. I tried out energy shield, wasn't a fan. I still got mobbed, zerged, and killed. I didn't get to try out evasion. It's not really for my character. I imagine it's probably pretty strong though if you mix it with other layers, but I found armor is very, very good. It makes it so you can literally stand inside of packs and they just they can't hit you, man. They can't deal damage to you. It's great. You just tank them with your life flask. Now, another thing which is very good, especially if you're going armor, is going to be shields. Block is busted in PoE 2. It's crazy. So the way that block works in PoE 2 is as follows. A shield has a base amount of block. This one is 26%. All shields with block can roll increased block chance, which is a local modifier, which for this one, 55%. That local modifier modifies the base. Now it's 40%. And that number is then multiplied by all the nodes on the skill tree, which you can get pretty decent amount of, especially if you're in the warrior area. And that means it's very, very easy to get to 50 and 60, even 75 block if you heavily invest in the tree. And that is basically 4 times EHP if you manage to get to 75 block. Now, what's funny about this is there's actually an audio cue which happens when you block, and man, I hear that stuff constantly. It's like I'm listening to like a musical instrument. It just happens all the time. Now, block works on projectiles and strikes. It will not save you from slams. So that is one thing to remember. And a lot of bosses, they do have slams. So you still do need to build a big buffer, and armor can help with that. Resistance can help with that. Another thing I want to mention is that you can roll max resistances on jewels. You can roll 1 to 2%. So if you're struggling with elemental damage, grab some max res. It's pretty available, and you can also get that on shields as well, which is another reason to go for a shield. It was definitely a huge upgrade when I got block. It was like I was dying constantly. I couldn't even do a tier 1 map. Now I'm dealing like with everything just fine, apart from chaos damage. That still kills me, but besides the point. So that is my tip there on defenses in maps. The other thing I want to talk to you guys about is the economy. Now, the economy is a pretty interesting thing right now. Rares are king. There is no good items. No one has good items to buy or sell, and items are going to be what you want to focus on. So I've been picking up every single rare item, of course. I throw it in a 2 Exalt dump tab. That's step number 1. Now, I also pick up every magic item, and I augment it after identifying it with Doriani, and then I throw it in a 2 Exalt dump tab. The basic premise is pick up all rares, pick all magic items. When you're full, come out here, identify with Doriani, smash it in the 2x dump tab, go back in. Oh, so also click the well, because you need to click the well constantly. All right, so that's what I've been doing, getting them in the dump tabs. Now, I took it a step further, because rares are so hard to get. I've also been picking up white items. Now, I made a special filter for this so that I make sure that I only have good bases. I'm sure that that'll become available soon. But I pick up all the whites which show my filter, and I either transmute and aug them all and stick them in the dump tab, or I alch them. Now, I save the alchs for the really good ones. So the +1 arrow bows, I alch all those. Any jewelry and any belts, I alch them all, and they sell great. And some of them, you actually get really good ones, and you can sell them for like 10 exalts instead. Now, that's what I've been doing for my kind of currency situation here, and it's been working out pretty good for me. You can also sell a bunch of other stuff as well. I'm sure there's tons of strategies already out there. Just figured I'd share with you guys what I have been doing. Okay, now the currency exchange is also very useful for Endgame as well, specifically to get alks, because alks are right now 1 exalt to 3 alks, which means you can actually alk all of your waystones. Now, if you're strong enough, this will help your progression significantly, and you'll have a much smoother time. So I'd recommend doing that, but it's pretty damn hard, man, so be a bit cautious, because breaking the maps, that sucks. And in addition to that, regals are also pretty available, so you can buy up those regals, and if you get any blue items, which are particularly badass, you can regal them and sell them for even more potentially. And I'd also buy a bunch of jewels as well when you get into endgame and start regaling them as well, because jewels are crazy in PoE 2. They have so many broken stats on them, man, and buying some magic ones, regaling them, exalting them, you can get so much player power from that alone. Now, the other thing I want to talk about quickly is going to be the Atlas passive tree. Now, I haven't, done too much on the Atlas passive tree just yet. I can't even remember how to open it. But there is a few nodes which I have seen, which do seem to be the vibe. Okay, so the very first ones are going to be these ones here. Waystones found in maps have 10% chance to be higher. I would definitely go for this. The Waystone sustain is rough. I'm currently level 75, and I'm still doing like level 70 maps, which is not great. I'm capable of doing more, but they just don't drop. So I've been going for all the higher Waystone chance. And also, essences are crazy. Especially if you're doing what I'm doing and picking up white items, you can use the essences to get some crazy modifiers on them and make some crazy money that way. But yeah, you want to get all this plus chance to get higher. You want to get all that stuff. In addition to that, you can also get Waystone quantity. And there's also, I think, a little bit more Waystone stuff perhaps somewhere else, but Waystone stuff. Get the Waystone stuff is what I'm saying. And then after that, I'm planning on going for 1 rare monster in your maps is duplicated. If you guys didn't know, pretty much all the loot is from rare monsters in maps, or uniques or league mechanics. But rare monsters are the consistent one. So duplicating one of the rares, if you get 5 rares in your map, which sounds about right, that's 20% more loot. Well, not quite, but you get what I'm saying. So that's pretty damn good note. And rares also drop a lot of the waystones. So those things kind of feed into each other. And the other tip I'll give you guys here is that if you don't know where to go, you're like, man, where do I go? I don't know what to do. First things first, you want to find your hideout. Now, I'm seeing if I have one here, but there is a hideout icon on one of the maps. Go for it immediately, because playing in the kind of world atlas place, in the hub, the ziggurat, that sucks. Trading there is awful. And also, the well is super far away, the stash is far away, it sucks. So get your hideout going. This is what it looks like. If any of them will work, grab it, you're good to go. And then you can set up your hideout just right. Now, if you don't know what else to do after that, personally, I think that the best strategy in terms of going for nodes is to find the boss nodes. If you can kill them, they drop the most loot, but most importantly, they drop the most waystones. Many times I kill the boss and it drops 3 waystones. Some of them are much, much higher tier. Like I've done a tier 4 map, drops a tier 7 waystone or something like that. Maybe not that, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you know what I mean. They drop a lot of them and they're high. And this is the boss icon here. So if you're looking for stuff to do, that's what I would do. Hopefully this has been a pretty helpful video. I know it's not a heap, but I'll give you guys some more info soon. Now, last things last, if you guys want to know more about my build, which I'm sure you've seen in the background here, let me know down below. I can make a video on that if you guys want to hear about it. Otherwise, I'll probably leave it a bit longer and try and figure some more stuff out. But if you guys really want the info, I will post a video on that as well. So hope you guys have enjoyed. Until next time, cheers.